We are recording, which means we are live officially. So your phone should be put away. Remember, the mic is hot. It can hear all your conversations. So just keep that in mind while we talk about 5.1 or 5.2, excuse me. Put my captions over here. You guys should be able to see my screen. I'll give the Zoom room a chance to do its thing. And what?
Like yesterday, what we're doing today?
Sort of. This is me more showing you than me like coding along with me, but it is similar to yesterday. All right, so if we look at our weekly thread, we look at our agenda here, there is two main ideas. Yes, Logan?
So there's 5.1 assignment and 5 unit 5 assignment. We put moving the end to the 5.
You'll submit the whole route at once. So once we finish all of unit 5 stuff, you'll zip and submit unit 5 route and submit that one time. You're submitting one thing on Canvas for all of the assignments that we're doing. So when we finish this unit, which we have not yet, I will give you guys, I will let you know when it's time to submit your route, but you'll submit it all at once as compared to once every time. The assignment due dates are going to line up with the the route submission due dates. So nothing will appear as missing, and I'll just grade off the Canvas assignment, it'll make more sense when we actually get there. So don't worry about submitting anything right now. I'll tell you how to do it later. Okay, in other news, let's talk about 5.2, which is now available in Canvas. And the reason that this is a little bit more under construction is because in the past, before we've done this root folder, all for one unit sort of situation that we're trying here, this was 2 separate HTML files, and that matters because there's 2 different things that are affecting, they're going to conflict. Anyways, it'll make more sense later on. Unit 5 is focusing, or not Unit 5, excuse me. Assignment 5.2 is focused on 2 main ideas. That's going to be CSS pseudo-classes and CSS fonts. So if you look at our agenda for the day on Web Design Thursday, in the replies, there's a bunch of links here, 2 of them for pseudo-classes and 3 of them for fonts. The first part of the actual Unit 5 assignment is changing the font around. So I need to update this, my bad. It's changing the fonts around, and you do that by, where'd it go? You click on this CSS fonts 3. I put it last in the order because these 2 were not the ones that I thought. So CSS fonts 3 is the one that I'm going to click on here. This is the entire W3 Schools breakdown of how you can change the way that fonts look on your site as a whole or on specific elements using CSS. So back in Unit 3, we talked a little bit about like the psychology of colors, how things are going to make you feel, or they're going to make you assume things based on their design language alone, even if you don't realize it. The same thing is true for fonts. The idea, though, is that there's 4 generic, or 5 technically. I group monotype. I group these 2 together. But anyways, there's 2 main groups of fonts, and then there's some subgroups that go into one of these 2 mains. Serif fonts are typically what you think of as like fancy or essay or like official. Those are going to be serif fonts, like Times New Roman. It's going to be this guy right here in the middle. Serifs are the names for all these little extra bits and bobs that are attached to the lettering to give it kind of this fancy appeal. And so sans serif, the prefix sans means without, right? No serifs here. Those are just going to be straight up and down, a lot more minimalistic, a lot more modern looking. Sans serif fonts are going to be also called display fonts. These are the 2 main kind of types of fonts that you're going to be working with on your page. All right, so monospace is just font that has all the same width, makes it very mechanical. If you think back like to the early days of computers, how all the letters look the same size and width, that's monospace. And then cursive and fantasy are kind of your script fonts, your handwritten fonts, your meme fonts, your papyruses, right? These 2 are the ones you're going to be using probably the least officially. You can have fun with them, but like in official developments, these are the 2 you're going to avoid the most. You're going to stick to these 2 most frequently. Okay, so the reason I talk about all this is because it is important to setting the font family. You need to have at least one of these. You need to have a serif, a sans serif, a monospace, cursive, whatever, in your CSS, because there's a bunch of different types. There's the serif fonts that you've heard of. I like Garamond a lot. It's one of my favorites. The sans serif fonts that you've also heard of. Helvetica is my favorite of those. The more you look at design and development, you'll come up with favorite fonts and favorite hex codes and stuff like that. It sneaks up on you. Monospace, you can see how all of these are about the same width on each other, very even look. And then cursive and fantasy, we've got the stuff that we're all the scripty stuff. So the actual font family, or the font family property, I mean, is the thing that you change in your CSS in order to make the font appear differently. So if I am in my VS Code here for my Unit 5 whole folder, that's second period. So I'm going to go File and then Open Folder, find my way to 6th period web design, and then open up my Unit 5 folder right at the top here. That's got our HTML from our block day. And what we're going to do now, before we do anything crazy with the font family, is we need to make our new file for 5.2, as well as our style sheet, and link it back to the index page. So since we're still inside of our Unit 5 root folder as a whole inside of VS Code, there's a couple different ways we can make our new HTML file. You can either double click in the big rectangle, and that will automatically pop up this little text box right here. You can middle finger click to get this expanded menu, and then click on new file as long as you middle finger click in the main big rectangle like this. Or with the big rectangle selected, the thin blue edge out there, you can press the paper button, or the paper with the plus button. That's what I'm going to do, and type out your canvas naming scheme exactly like 5.1. So we're going to go first name, first initial, last name, excuse me, period number, and then 5.2. And if I were to hit enter right now, it's a text file. This is not what we're wanting. This is not the smart and responsive HTML file that's going to make things a lot easier for us as a developer. So you got to make sure that you include that file extension. You can do that by right-clicking, middle finger clicking, and going to rename. And then you put the .html at the end just like that. And now we can start this like a normal HTML file. Change my document title. I'm going to make this a bit smaller so I can see my, actually, hold on. I'm going to just click on this to make it smaller. There we go. I'm going to put a paragraph in here. I can just type the letter P and then hit enter, or click the wrench icon and say, this is assignment 5.2. We'll change that later on. I need to also now create my style sheet. Go to the Explorer and click on the Styles subfolder. You'll know you're in the subfolder when you have the blue rectangle. You can middle finger click and go new file. You can click on the paper icon, or you can double click. Double click doesn't work, actually, just kidding. So I'm going to go with the new file icon right here, and I'm going to make a 5.2 style.css and then hit enter. So now the only two tabs that I should have open are my 5.2 HTML that I just created, my blank 5.2 style sheet that I've just created. You can tell it's correct because these two are offset from one another. And now I just have a little bit of placeholder text on my 5.2 so that I know that it'll run, or something will display when I run this HTML. The last step in the same order of stuff that we've been doing with our different HTMLs is we need to link our style sheet to our 5.2. You can do that by typing LINK anywhere in the head container, hitting enter. That's going to automatically add your REL style sheet and your high ref. You're always going to, if I expand my Explorer here, you always got to start with the subfolder inside of the, inside of the quotes, and then click on 5.2 style.css. And it still needs that TYPE equals text /CSS for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why, but now we have all three of our required pieces for a Zelda link here, and we can start CSSing here in just a second. The last step that we have to do of setup here with this new root folder method is we have to attach our new 5.2 HTML, because they come in a pair now that they're linked together. They're interlinked, excuse me. We need to link our index page to include this 5.2 HTML file. So I'm going to click on my index page. Right now, the only thing on there is an anchor. I'm going to take this cool math link off for now. Is this anchor for 5.1? We're going to make a copy of that, except change it to 5.2 instead of 5.1. So I'm going to hit A and then hit enter. It's going to automatically give me my start and end tag and a high ref with some quotes. Put in BB Lakeney and then click on 5.2. Put 5.2 in right here. And then that's the last step of setup that you need to do before we actually get into the assignment here. It's kind of a pain, I know, but it keeps it all in one spot. and it makes things, it does make things a little bit easier in the long run. So I'm going to close all these. If I run my HTML currently, I'm just going to use Chrome. All it says is this is assignment 5.2. Oh my God, so many pop-ups. Okay, this is assignment 5.2. Let's get back into thinking about font family. Font family is the property that we're going to set for our CSS, whether that's specific to a class, whether that's specific to an entire element, or whether that's specific to our entire page of our site for a sense of consistency. The property that we're going to set is font family. I am going to use the body as my selector because I want this to affect the entirety of my visible web page. And the property I'm going to put in when I want to change the font is font-family. Now, when I hit colon, you can see there's a whole bunch of options here and a whole set of different names and different quotes, all types of stuff. We're going to ignore all that and just type at the barest minimum, the minimum that you need is one of these 5 types of font families. I recommend sticking with 1 or 2, but the 3 through 5 are also available. I'm going to do serif, sans serif as an example. So if I set this to sans serif, that's the only value I currently have set for my font family. If I go back to my output, which I'm not live, so I'd have to run this once again, and go back to my HTML, click on the play button, run and debug that, you can see the text looks a little bit different. It's taken off all of those serifs, all of those little decorative pieces on my text here, because I've set the entire body rule to only use the font family of sans serif. So if I set it to serif, which is the default, go to my output, it turns back into the more fancy with the little frills, little extra stuff on the corners here. By setting the font family group, excuse me, sorry. By setting the font family group, you're able to affect any text-based element that appears on your screen. So if I add a bunch of, let's see, if I add some headings, just real quick, H2, and then H3. If I go to my output, they're also going to be, well, of course not, but I need them to be. Hold on 1 second. Oh, it's font family serif, that's why. Okay, so if I set this back to sans serif, sorry, I confused myself. Our font family is set to sans serif. All of my text is going to appear in a sans serif type of font. It's going to take off all the frills, make it a more easily legible, more display style font. That just makes things a little bit easier to work with. If you want to get more specific than just using the kind of grouping of fonts that you want to communicate with your site, you have all these different names that you can work with. And if you put them in order in the value section of your CSS, it's going to go in order of availability. So like if I set Times New Roman first, it's going to default to Times New Roman. If for whatever reason the first font isn't available, it'll go to the second font that you set. If the second font is available, the third font, all the way down to however many fonts you want to use. So if we're sticking in the sans serif family, there's going to be some subtle differences between these fonts, so just bear with me. But if you go into the property and go ahead of the font grouping, like the serif and stuff like that, add some quotes, and then the name of a font, like Arial, followed by a comma, thank you, followed by a comma, that is going to set our web page to be in Arial font, which looks pretty much exactly the same as other sans serif fonts. We can do this by setting a couple different options here, all of them within quotes. Sorry, I lost my tab. All of them within quotes, and in the order from first to last is the order they're going to try to render. So let's do Verdana next, and then Helvetica. Just go to my CSS here. Inside of these quotes, we're going to go Verdana, and then after these quotes, we're going to do another one of Helvetica. And by doing this, this gives my web page 3 different options of fonts that can render, fonts that can load on the page, if in case one of them is not available. So right now it's set to Arial. It should be at least. It's defaulted to a serif font for some reason. I'm going to try rerunning it. Hold on. I don't know why it's doing that. Did I spell Arial wrong? Let's see. No, I spelled it right. Sans serif. Maybe it's just one quote. I'm gonna take the quotes off and see if that's what's making an issue. This worked in second period. So we're just gonna name these fonts. Put a comma after that. Okay, maybe that's what was it. Okay, so we got 3 separate fonts here. If I go back to my output, please be sans serif. Cool. All right, they are set to sans serif. This is Arial font. If Arial font weren't available, it's going to go to Verdana next. Just pretend that Arial's still in the CSS. It's going to look almost exactly the same, but a tiny bit different. That's Verdana font. You can tell there's a little bit of thickness on the base here, and a little bit of tapering down here on the, I forgot what this term of typography is, but it is different. Okay, and let's say Verdana wasn't available. Then Helvetica is our third option. This is Helvetica. It looks almost exactly like Arial, but trust me, they are different. So you can set lots of different font options, and there's lots of font names that if you go to CSS fonts, here's what? 3 times 5, a bunch of them. 15, I know it's 15, but there is a bunch of them. Anyway, that's CSS fonts, is just putting it into the font family grouping and then labeling them by name and at least by group, by like what type of these 5 groups you want your font to look like. Now I want to talk about pseudo-classes briefly. Pseudo-classes are the first kind of introduction to something called a conditional. So in programming, when you hear the word conditional, it's sometimes referred to as an if-then statement. And it basically means that if something happens, if a certain thing of rules are met, then a certain condition happens. And we can use CSS to do that. So in order to do that, I need an anchor here. I'm just going to type it out. Let me grab, I'll just do Canvas. Control V, my Canvas link in there. And then I'm going to add a little text so that I know I can click on it. Canvas, if I were to run this, by default, even though it's affected by the font family situation, Canvas, URLs, anchors have a default set of styling. They're underlined, they're blue, whatever. When I click on this link, it takes me to the Canvas login, sure. But now that I've clicked this link, it's changed color. The condition of if click was met. And we can set a couple different types of conditions, some cool ones that'll make your page more responsive and a little bit more fun to interact with, which you can find on CSS pseudo-classes 1, attached in our agenda here. Pseudo-classes are used to define a special state of an element. Here's a couple examples of what it can do. Like when I mouse over this button, it changes colors. Or when I click on this, it changes to a different type of styling like this. And the syntax, how you actually set this, there are some preset ones, is you have a selector, like an anchor, and then a colon followed by a pseudo-class name. So anchor is one of the most commonly used instances of a pseudo-class. We have anchor links as a whole that are going to be set to this color, which FF should be red. A visited link, like what I've just done, when I click on it, it changes color to this. When you hover over something, you mouse over it, that's hover. It's your pseudo-class of a colon hover. And then when you select it, that's when you're actually clicking down the mouse and it changes color a little bit. That's active. So how we do this, right? This is a visited link, so it's applying some certain type of CSS styling. I can go into my CSS and set a pseudo class, because a regular class would just have 1 period. Pseudo classes have 2. Let's say we want on hover, that's our conditional. When the condition of hover is met, then we're going to set the color to red, and we're going to set the font dash weight to be bold. Okay. So now, if I were to run this CSS, like from scratch, it still says that that link is visited, but when I hover over it, it will turn red and get bold because the condition of hover is being met. So you can see, if we go into our CSS, I obviously don't expect you guys to memorize every single pseudo class that is available. But if you type a selector and then a colon, you're going to get a whole bunch of different pseudo classes. Like, look how long this list is. Whole bunch of different type of conditionals that when they're met, something will change. Like the first letter of a paragraph, first line of a paragraph, a placeholder, a shadow, active, right, defined. There's a whole ton of different pseudo class options that you can see by just typing a selector like an anchor, or you can do it can be classes as well. So if this had a class of link, you can still have a pseudo class like hover. And on hover, I'm going to make it turn red. I'm going to make this certain conditionals. Once the if is met, then the condition happens. I'm going to set the font size to be extra, extra large, or extra small, excuse me, extra large. And then a.links on, I'll go back, on active, I'm going to make them, sorry, it's wrong here. There we go. We're going to make the color turn green and set the font dash size. You don't have to do this. This is just me giving you examples. We're going to set it to extra, extra small. So we have two conditions here, on hover and on active, which means you're clicking on it, clicking and holding at least. These two pieces of CSS are going to happen. So if I go back here into my anchor and I add a quick class of link, so that it'll line up with my CSS there, refresh. Here's my output. When I hover, you can see the hover conditions being met. And when I click down, I'm clicking and holding right now, it's going to get extra small and turn green. So certain conditions are being met, certain CSS is applying. I clicked on it and it vanished. All right, I actually clicked on it, I let off. And you can use pseudo classes to do that. So there's the W3 Schools that walks you through a lot of different types of pseudo classes, like hovers on divs, matching the paragraph element, matching all eyes, the language pseudo class, right? There's a whole bunch of different CSS pseudo classes, and we'll talk about CSS pseudo elements later. But there's a reference document here in case you ever get stuck or in case you ever want to try something like that. So the reason I'm shifting things a little bit is because I want to give you guys kind of an introduction to how these two things work in the CSS before we get really in depth with the actual assignment 5.2, which I think we're just going to do tomorrow as a group, because I need to adjust when I'm actually asking so that you're learning what I'm trying to tell you, or at least experiencing what I'm trying to tell you, and consolidate it just into a better exercise that's not so boring and not so much of me talking. So last few things on the agenda before I'll let you guys either work on whatever project you'd like, or if you want to take a shot at 5.2 in its current state, you can just for practice, because it is going to change tomorrow. So don't worry about it too much. Got some extra optional stuff here. So on your index page, remember the only part that's required are the anchors that link me to the HTML file so that I know what you're working with when I go to grade this unit as a whole. I have linked here, I'm going to close this and minimize this, a couple links on some cool HTML and cool CSS that you can experiment with, you can mess around with to add to your index page, to add to your chapter summaries. Totally optional, but if you want to take a look at those are linked in the agenda. And the last thing in the agenda is I still need YouTube thumbnails. So if you're still interested in making some YouTube thumbnails, they just got to be these 3 rules. And I will take advantage of those and you'll be able to see your work up on screen when I post my Zoom rooms and stuff like that. So that's really all I have for you today. We'll consider this Zoom room kind of like an archive, like a video that we can reference later on. Does anybody have any questions before I just help you guys with whatever you're going to work on for today? Devere, do you have one?
Can you go back to 5.2?
Yes. There's my 5.2 CSS. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to close up the Zoom room. We'll go off the air and we'll just enjoy the rest of our period here, working on whatever you would like to work on. Yeah.